And we're live. Welcome back, everyone. Onan here. Hope you can hear me okay. It's a couple minutes late, but it is Monday, June 30th. Um, Last week without midnight for a while. I hope he was gone for a couple of weeks. And so I just wanted to live stream. Actually, I had a number of things I wanted to talk about or could talk about today. The one that I very fascinated about and would really, really like people's input on this relates to the title, which is Heroic Virtue or Just Another Day at the Office? What's really expected of Catholic marriage? This is a theme that has come up many, many times in our Discord community. We actually have multiple Discord communities. We have one for the UCM, and then I have one for this group too. And we spent a lot of time talking and debating, arguing, ruminating on the um, the church's expectations for people, particularly married couples, in the sort of the areas of having children, how many children, what's an appropriate reason not to have children. Hey, Pickin, good to see you in the comments. Always appreciate your input. I think you'll enjoy this conversation. I'll be interested in your insight, which I kind of know what it'll be. Um, but kind of getting back to the um, you know how difficult is it supposed to be? Because this is one of the responses I typically get anytime I kind of venture into the conversation of what does the church require, what are couples reasonably supposed to suffer, endure, however you want to call it, especially as it pertains to the topic of abstinence in marriage, if that becomes appropriate or necessary for one reason or another, typically to space children. Um, and I wanted to talk about this because anytime I or someone else sort of suggests that a particular circumstance is beyond what couples should be expected to endure, the response is, well, God expects us to do difficult things, which is true. Or look at Mary and Joseph; they were chaste their entire marriage, which is true. Or look at celibate clergy; they're celibate. So what are you complaining about? Well, it's true that they're um, celibate, or at least we hope they are. But the rest of us are not. We're not supposed to be celibate. At least I thought and not everyone is called to that. And I think there are definite differences between the life of a truly celibate person who, lives, let's say, alone or with other priests, for example, doesn't have the responsibilities of children and things like that, and isn't sharing your house with someone that you've had an intimate relationship with. Um, yeah, that's very true. Um, so so this is often used to try to deflect any type of discussion or debate about if if a particular church teaching or approach to this stuff is kind of beyond what reasonable people can be expected to do, or on sort of a in a related way and on more of a pastoral level, at what point does culpability become significantly diminished? Um, and I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with, myself included, my wife included. Is we all, I think we all expected life would not just be a parade and a walk through the park. I mean, we all understood that we were giving a part of ourselves, that domestic life would hopefully be mostly fun and enjoyable, but there would be difficulties with it. And I think every one of us certainly understood that there are challenges that come with raising children, even if you really have, didn't grow up with, a family around you and didn't have a, experienced babysitting. I think most of us understand that, kids are challenging. Waking up in the middle of the night, change diapers, sick kids, providing for them, raising them, all that kind of stuff. I think everyone kind of expects that. And even for those of us who, before we got married, learned natural family planning, expected we would probably have to use it at some point in time, maybe right away. From my perspective, for sure, I the way it was presented to me is, you're going to have an intimate relationship, but that there will be periods of abstinence, especially if you're using NFP, periods of abstinence um, mixed in there. But it was presented that the abstinence was sort of the exception to the rule, not the norm, right? Um, no one really said, "Oh, by the way, you may have to go weeks, months, I mean, months or years." I expected, a week or weeks, but not months or years at a time. But as I've been, you know, married long enough and have encountered a lot of couples, I see that as actually kind of a fairly common thing. And so the question is, what do we do with that? Setting aside rules and all that, but how much should couples be expected to do, or maybe a better way to do it is, how difficult is that for the marriage? And in this past week, I had just a very strange, um, kind of a strange week on Twitter because I encountered, well, I, enc- I encountered one very, very new position that I really hadn't seen before, but then I had seen it was sort of juxtaposed with another position that I was very familiar with because I was talking about natural family planning and things like that. So the the one that I'm very familiar with, this was a traditionalist. I don't know that I had really seen him on Twitter too much, but a traditionalist who basically was criticizing NFP or discouraging it, which I have my own complaints about it, but was basically suggesting get rid of the whole NFP thing. Just, basically have sex whenever you want it, as much as you want it, and then just handle all the kids that come from it. And that, my experience has been that a lot of traditionalists take that approach. They take the approach that, um, well, they have their skepticism of NFP, uh, both on a practical and moral level. I think they probably rightly understand, even if they don't have any experience with it, that it kind of sucks. I mean, it does. Some of them, I think, actually have moral reservations of it, or at least think it's probably overused and abused. I'm pretty skeptical of that personally. I think, unless you have, I don't know, remarkable cycles where the abstinence period is, let's say, less than a week, which I don't think is the case for most people. For most of us, it's really more like 10 days on the shorter side and 2 weeks on the longer side, or even longer. I personally think that most people, if you're going to use it for an extended period of time, are going to have a good reason, because it's not very pleasant to use, especially for the men, but I think for most ladies as well. And but there are those who think it should never be used, and they view it as the same thing as contraception. Um, and while I'm not insensitive to those arguments, I think it's pretty plain that there are fundamental differences, whether they matter or not. But there's fundamental differences between contraception and, let's say, natural family planning, if for no other reason than how they how they work. One is just much easier, I'm sure. I have no personal experience with it, but one is much easier to use because it doesn't involve abstinence, right? So, but that was a traditionalist arguing, hey, basically arguing, long as you don't use contraception or use NFP without a good reason, hey, life's a party, enjoy it, live it up, have fun, it's good. And I'm fine with that in concept, but that was a traditionalist. That was a traditionalist recommendation. Well, during the course of that, someone else came in that I never seen before that was on the extreme opposite end and is apparently not a sedevacantist, but is super hardcore. And basically, this is a woman, apparently, a married a woman, Catholic, I guess, 5 kids, who, and we're still kind of going at it on Twitter, but said you should only have sex and as, let's say, as few of times as possible for procreation. And once procreation has occurred, you need to stop. And there, of course, can be no pregnancy sex, no postmenopausal sex, or if a couple finds out they're infertile, they need to stop as well. And I was very, I mean, I didn't know these people still existed. I knew that there was times back, um, well, they spent a lot of time quoting Saint Augustine, right? And I knew that was sort of the attitude of Saint Augustine, of Saint Augustine and people of his time period. I honestly didn't realize that anyone to this day still follow that or try to follow it, who was actually married and living it, right? I mean, I've seen some single folks out there, celibates or just non-married people, I don't know, talk about these things in theory when they don't have any actual experience. But to my knowledge, this is the first actual married person who was advocating for that and apparently lives it out, which is just remarkable to me. And so you have and of course, um, was not interested in any objection or question about whether that's good for the marriage or not. It didn't matter. This is what the church held early on, supposedly, or at least some of the saints did. And, we're supposed to be detached from that. We're supposed to be preparing ourselves for heaven, and that it is purely a sin to engage in conjugal relations except for the express purpose of procreating. And once the procreation is done, you need to stop. That is just fascinating to me to come from another Catholic. As far as I can tell, they're Catholic. And so what are we supposed to do with that? How do we, is that once the way it was, and is has would God actually require that of people? I think is probably the more fundamental question, because one of the things this person offered in response was your your marriage can, you shouldn't need sex, right? Your marriage should survive without it. And I guess on a basic level that's true. I don't know of anyone who's actually died, at least directly, from it. But I can see how it could certainly be indirectly related if it leads to bad habits and and practices and things like that that could lead, drinking and drug use and other bad things. But setting that aside, I think the more fundamental question um, is is the standard whether someone can theoretically survive something, and if they're not going to die from it, or their marriage isn't going to die from it, does that mean that that's within the realm of what's expected of people? And I really question how that can possibly be the case. And here's kind of my position on it, especially from the standpoint of people that have children and are raising children. uh, Being a parent is one of the most wonderful and blessed experiences. Been blessed with 9 kids, and it is it's taken a lot. But I honestly don't really think about it too much because it's clearly worth the sort of day to day sacrifices it takes, things I give up, the work I have to do, all that kind of stuff. I don't really think about that. Um, haven't had really a nice full night's sleep since we got married. Um, but um, it 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 is all consuming for my wife and I, and it is especially a demand and a load on her to be a parent to all these kids, and it's things that we have to be on the same page about, and we have to work together to handle. And I'm absolutely certain that our marriage has been better and stronger when we've been able to maintain uh, an intimate relationship with each other, even if it's within the context of NFP, and you're spending a lot of the time apart, so to speak. Having any amount is is a major difference maker, and it brings us closer together. It reconnects us. It just there's so many obvious benefits from it beyond simply the act of procreation, that it's obvious to me why God designed us for it, and designed it for an actual good purpose. And I also believe that children are, especially in their formative years, are fragile. And that it only takes. Someone told me once, um, children. What to say? It's very easy for children not to pick up your own virtues and good habits. You could set the greatest example for them, do all the right things, and there's still um, all kinds of ways and reasons why they won't pick that up from you. But they will pick up your bad habits, even if you only do it once, like the naughty word that slips out of your mouth, or you know the one thing that you do. Maybe you skip mass, or you just do something that they will notice, and they may only take once for them to decide that that's good enough for them, because you are in fact a role model. You set the pace for them, so to speak. um and so that has always struck me, and it's one of the reasons why I would say that is true from my own experience, which is why I think it is really important that we not set the baseline for what is survivable, because couples and marriages and families can survive a lot of crap, a lot of heartache, a lot of trauma, but you're not thriving. Um, and in a special way, you're probably you need to be at your best, in my opinion, as much as you possibly can when it comes to your children, so that you can be fully present for them and be bringing your best possible example for them. And it is much, much harder to do that when your relationship is sort of starved of physical affection with each other without an obvious reason for it. When I say obvious reason, like it's like health wise, like you just literally couldn't do it, or it would be some grave health risk. I'm not talking about moral reasons, but just physical health reasons. And that's why I this idea that um, while a marriage, let's say theoretically, can survive and a couple can stay married, even if, let's say, they were following that very, very strict Augustinian approach, I can't imagine that they're going to be as good of parents to their children as they could be and would be if they had a normal, functioning, intimate life. And I don't think it has to even be that dramatic for it to impact in a negative way how these children get raised. I don't think it has to be mom and dad living that type of very austere. I would call that austere. I don't know anything about the rest of their day-to-day life, but even even let's say temporary or sort of minor um what do I say, compromises of the relationship or physical relationship and how the husband and wife are interacting with each other. I think plays itself out in the home. Children notice. My own children have have perceived when my wife and I were struggling in one way or another, and it wasn't like we were, you know, on the verge of divorce or anything like that. It was just tough. It was rough. Like, and the kids can tell that. And I think they can definitely tell in our attitude, in our patience, in our just overall approach to life, how joyful we are. And that is my biggest concern with those who are just very dismissive of the concerns of married people, or to flip it around, just sort of say, well, just pick up your cross and carry it. It's not just about the individual, and it's not even just about the couple, it's about the big picture. And that family dynamic is a um, complex, fragile environment that has all kinds of things challenging the family, and all kinds of outside influences trying to um, trying to, you know, vie for those children's attention and moral values. That's all going to be present. What we don't necessarily need to do is to add additional um, issues into the family without a really good reason for it. So there's my pick up your cross advocate. Um, so Jonah says, I don't think it's always bad for them to see the rough spots if they can tell it's solid. Again, I'm not saying you're not going to sanitize out the rough spots. You're not. I, I it seems to me, you correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me you and a lot of people have this attitude that if we just softened, if you will, what people are going through in their intimate life, that somehow that's just going to eliminate all hardship and difficulties and crosses. And of course it's not, right? It doesn't stop people from losing their jobs, or a fire, or a parent or close loved one dies or becomes sick, or one of your children sick, or is struggling in school, or does something stupid, and the kind of things that we all do. All of that is happening irrespective. And so i just i just I don't think that's persuasive at all because I think it's going to come anyway, and there's still going to be an abundance of those opportunities for them to see that life is not easy. None of this makes mom and dad wealthier than they were going to be overnight. It doesn't change your income level. It doesn't really change anything other than it it allows mom and dad to be operating, I would say, at if not full capacity, a fuller capacity to handle all these things and to provide that type of example to our children and how you handle these difficulties when they come, right? And so I think that that's why it seems to me that we should at least be more sensitive as we're talking about these things and not be so dismissive of people and not sort of just assume that they just want the easy way out. They just want pleasure and enjoyment and difficulties to be lifted. I don't think that reflects any of the good people in my life and my circle that have these kinds of struggles. And I don't think it adequately reflects the significance and the magnitude that these things can have in the marriage and the family. Now, what that all means, if it means anything, when it comes to us as Catholics, I don't know. Perhaps it's more of just a pastoral acknowledgement that if and when couples struggle or find themselves cutting corners or bending the rules, maybe just understanding what's really going on there and how they may just sincerely trying um, to do their best, and it's not necessarily for selfish motives, but it could very well be from a sincere desire to be the best version of themselves that they can for the children. Because um, I think that there's one thing that's universal and fundamental is people love their children and want what's best for their children and want their children to grow up with whatever values they have, even if they're not the best Catholics in the world. I think most of us want to to provide, and allow our kids to become the best versions of themselves that they can. And I think most people, if you've been married long enough, unless you have some real serious dysfunction in your marriage, understand that a marriage and a relationship where husband and wife, mom and dad can um, at least be partially satisfied in this one very sacred and intimate part of their relationship are going to do better, are going to be more successful at all those things, are going to be better children, better parents to their children than they would be otherwise. And of course, here's the thing you emphasize: none of this would prevent couples from voluntarily taking upon themselves to to fast and mortify themselves if they wanted to. um, by all means, like um, if you as a couple discern and choose that we're going to adopt a more, let's say, a rigorous or strict lifestyle, even if it's above and beyond what's actually required of the church, do it. Maybe consult with a spiritual director about it, but do that. No one's stopping you from doing that. No one is saying you got to use natural family planning if you don't want to use natural family planning. You should have the option to do so if you need to. And this is where I think Catholics really can fall into a trap, because we see all these things that we could do, or if this is good, more of it is better. And this is, I think, is really the temptation that the Pharisees fell into at the time of our Lord, was just kind of adding, like, these are all good things. Well, let's do some more. And I think that, and I think in sort of a related vein, we can look at the heroic lives of the saints, including some married saints, although there aren't a ton of them that I would say, you know, had relationships and lives that kind of really reflected most people's experience. The Holy Family being an example. I don't. Well, I think we obviously respect them and venerate them. I don't think there's a ton that married Catholics with children and having an intimate life and all that. I don't know. There's a ton that we can take away on a practical level from the Holy Family, and so, I think that I think we ought to, certainly encourage people to kind of rise to new levels, just to pursue sanctity, to want to become saints, to do all those things, but not to make it a prerequisite to being considered just baseline good, or on the alternative, not to take everything short of that as being warranting hell. Because if that is the standard, if the baseline standard for, let's say, getting into heaven or staying out of hell as a married Catholic is to live that kind of very austere, Holy Family like approach or whatever, I don't think most of us are going to do that well, if at all. And I don't think that's watering things down. I think that's just recognizing reality. So, just checking up on a few of these comments here. So erase almost all the dating rules and also eliminate basic sex rules. Maybe that wasn't meant for me, but I mean, this is just so funny because this is such a Catholic attitude about things, is that if we give an inch anywhere, somehow we're just opening the door to just the floodgates to anything goes. And that doesn't have to be the case. It clearly isn't the case. uh, I sometimes wonder if people that really struggle to, like, I don't know, follow the obvious rules, and by obvious rules I mean, let's just say, save yourself for marriage, you know, save yourself for your spouse and reserve yourself for a spouse, stay away from the porn, that kind of stuff to me seems pretty obvious. Doesn't mean that everyone doesn't, that there aren't people that struggle with that, and there are a lot of people that struggle with some of that, especially the porn stuff. But I think most people recognize that as being, obviously expected, right? And like I said earlier, I think a lot of people, Catholics understand, if you've been catechized at all, understand that we're not going to be able to use birth control in marriage, and we understand that when we take that, the vow at our wedding to be open to life and welcome children lovingly, etc. I think I think most of us, you know, more or less understand kind of what we're getting ourselves into. But then you just, especially if you take it to the, let's say, the extreme that I was talking about earlier in the show about uh, you know, the real strict Catholics who apparently are following some sort of Augustinian approach that, like, they literally only come together to make a baby as little as they have to, probably trying to avoid any unnecessary pleasure and enjoyment out of it. and then they go back to living like celibates. Um, you know, I don't see a lot of people lining up uh, to do that, but I also don't think that. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that not letting people live a more normal married life doesn't result in complete chaos or whatever. I don't think it. I don't think there's any evidence that it does. And I think most married people, even on the liberal side, you know, want a faithful marriage, want to you know raise their children well, have a family, do all those kinds of things. I don't think that you know turning the temperature down just a little bit from, let's say, the more strict approaches, you know, means that we could just never draw lines anymore. That just doesn't. It's just not consistent with reality. Now, there is a hazard. I mean, there's clearly a hazard in relaxing the rules if you want. Um, you don't have to look too much further than, let's say, the Anglican Church, who was the um, sort of started this whole process. They famously came out, or infamously came out, with the Lambeth Conference in like, it was 1938, 1939, maybe 36, somewhere in the mid to late 30s. And all they did was recognize that couples might be able to, not always, not anyone, but might be able to, under certain grave circumstances where total abstinence was not feasible, might be able to use birth control. And that was, of course, what um, Pius the 11th was responding to, and what I would say is kind of hurried fashion when he issued Casti Connubii in the same year. And many people will point to, and I think this is a, if not a compelling argument, a reasonable argument, that look at what that led to. It didn't just stop there, right? It didn't just stop there. It, you know, look at the trajectory, look at the current Anglican Church, um, and I am very sensitive to all that. Humani Vitae, Paul VI is famously, I mean, people like to point to Humani Vitae and the quote unquote predictions that Paul VI made of what would happen in the world if contraception was permitted. Um, Now, I'm not so sure those things weren't going to happen anyway. I mean, I'm not sure how predictive um, Paul the Sixth, or how let's see. Um, I don't know that he was really going out on a limb and predicting something that wasn't already obviously going to happen. But I get the concerns. I get the um, freedom and opportunities that, let's say, contraception gives people, especially those that might want to stray from the relationship that maybe they wouldn't have if there was a higher risk of pregnancy and all that. Um, but I I think there's at least as compelling argument that the sexual revolution came about, it kind of exploded because, in my opinion, the churches, especially our church, waited too long to do something about it. And by the time they did something, the cat was out of the bag. And, um, you know, had they been, let's say, more proactive about addressing some of these issues, and let's say, this is one of the criticisms I have of Casti Connubii, is this was sort of a groundbreaking encyclical that came out, was done in a, what was it, 4 to 6 months, something like that. You know, Humani Vitae came out after like is it 5, 6, 7 years of study and consideration and all that kind of stuff. Um, so I think that I think it's a more complicated thing than to simply say, well, once we allowed people to use contraception a little bit, it just opened the floodgates. Or if we relax the rules on when people can use NFP, or we relax what people can do during the abstinence periods, that's just going to spell disaster. I just don't think that's. I don't think it necessarily has to be that way. If it's handled appropriately, if we can sort of, um, just be willing to be a little uncomfortable for a while. I think that's part of it. People are not willing to be um, uncomfortable. Well, kind of like you're saying. I mean, uh, yeah. Anyone that wants to come on the show, you are. Um, Let me know. Uh, Reach out to me. I mean, if people want it, I can open up the show and let people come in. Um, but these are not easy things to talk about. There's a reason why I talk about these things without my damn face on screen, because um, you know. But I think that's what it would take. I think it would take people, let's say, in charge, or people with responsibility, or people with the capacity to do change, to be willing to get uncomfortable for a while, because it may require us to acknowledge that maybe we as a church haven't handled things correctly or in the best way in the past, and may in fact have even gotten some things wrong. And to the extent that we may have gotten some things wrong, and before everyone calls me heretic, let's just say the non-infallible things, the things that aren't necessarily guaranteed to be free from error. But if we get some of those wrong, someone is going to have to own up to the fact that people have suffered, marriages have suffered and struggled, because people have tried to follow these things because this is what they're told. And that is a major issue that, well, I don't think anyone will come out and acknowledge that. I think that very much is sort of a behind the scenes consideration or factor that makes any type of uh, reasonable response to these things either impossible or extraordinarily slow. And I think it's why the laity are so important. Why these kinds of conversations or shows are important, because um, I mean, I have the freedom to talk about these things, and I don't care if people trash me and say bad things about me. I do my best. I do my very best to be honest and upfront in what I'm thinking. I don't say everything I'm thinking. I still try to be somewhat prudent about things, but I try to be very, very transparent about my thought process. And I get um, accused, including by some of the people in the comments, that I'm too liberal in what I say, and that people are um, taking guidance from me. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a moral theologian. Damn it! Don't form your conscience after anything I say. Obviously, um, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to say it any different than how I think it is. I'm not going to. I'm not going to mislead people about the good, the bad, and the ugly of married life, simply because it might make certain Catholics or make the church look a little less flattering than people would like. I don't think I can do that. I think what we need is more transparency and honesty, and less secrecy, and less sort of reputation protection, that I think is natural and understandable and sometimes necessary, I think um, has some definite negative consequences, and real life consequences for people who are making very difficult decisions in their lives, are making very significant sacrifices in their life that are very painful and get right to the heart of the human experience, because they're doing their best to do what they believe is the right thing to do, or to avoid the things that they think are wrong, because they believe that their salvation, or their spouse's salvation, or the children's salvation is literally dependent upon it. And I know that from my own personal experience. That this is like, I'm far from an expert on many things, but this is something that I can very very much say from my own personal experience, that uh, it has very significant consequences or effects, as we try to wrestle with these things, and try to follow things or do things that uh, sometimes seem pretty damn impossible, and if I could say it, pretty ridiculous actually. Now, I'm imperfect. Um, I don't see all. I don't know all. I always, if I don't come out and say it, I fully acknowledge that I don't have the full picture, and that maybe there is some clarity that will come, if not on this side of eternity, hopefully on eternity. So I'm fully um, I fully acknowledge that maybe I just don't see things, but I don't know what I don't see, and neither do you. And I think we just have to go with what we can. We have to use the best judgment we have, use the best information we have, and try to follow a path that seems uh, true to ourselves, that we can, with integrity, uphold something, and defend something. And I think that's exactly right, Picken. I think a more humble, less perfect church, um, far from discouraging people, or causing people to lose trust and confidence, I would like to think would only um, make it more attractive, make it seem more believable, more approachable. I don't know. I struggle with that too. I mean, it is difficult for me to grapple or reconcile the idea that the church is the sort of the mystical body of Christ, and has can never err, can never teach anything but what is true. It is difficult to reconcile that with the idea that the same church, the same perfect church, can and does make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes hurt people, or wrongly lead them to be either too little concerned or too much concerned for their salvation. I don't know. This is where it becomes this is where it becomes really uncomfortable, I think, for everyone to be Catholic. But I think I think when we have these kinds of issues, when we're in this kind of uncertainty, this is where I always err on the side of, go with what is truthful, go with what is transparent, accept the consequences, but don't don't misrepresent things. Don't leave things out, ignore things, or add things to try and soften the blow. I think that can only have um, negative consequences, if not in the short term, in the long term. And I think we are seeing some of that. I think we are seeing some of the long term consequences of what people perceive, rightly or wrongly, as a lack of integrity in the church and how it handles things. All right, is this which Jonah is this? Is this Jonah? Is this Mrs. Jonah? Says in my more modernist moments, I've often thought of the lovers of truth as followers of Christ regardless. Following the truth tends to require sacrifice and humility. Okay, that's what I thought. Just want to make sure. I would love to hear what your wife has to say about things, but regardless, um, I would like to think that pursuing truth and pursuing Christ are not mutually exclusive, and at the same time, I don't think being a follower of Christ means that you must give, let's see, sort of unquestioning allegiance or obedience to things that um, don't have the seal of infallibility or whatever you want to say. Um, if if people are not allowed to question or challenge things that are not clearly, free of error, free of the possibility of error, why would they any change? Why would things ever get corrected? How do we ever, stop our mistakes, or how do we ever adjust so that we can, you know, teach something or believe something that's more full? Okay, maybe I misunderstood you. Um, yeah, I believe that. I mean, I think at the end of the day, this really kind of lines up with what I understand, and am grow in sort of learning to understand what the church talks about, and with in terms of conscience, a well-formed conscience. And a well-formed conscience, I don't think is a perfect conscience. I don't think it's one that has all the right answers necessarily. But it's one that is, sincere and based on integrity, and someone is sincerely, genuinely trying to reach the best conclusion with the information that they have. And even if that means coming to a conclusion, um, even if it means coming to a conclusion that is, let's say, at odds with something the church says, I think we're compelled to follow that. I don't know. That's my understanding. Um, yeah, I'm not putting that on screen. Um, but so all I really wanted, all I really wanted to do is to really um, draw attention to this fundamental issue of, when we're having discussions about life, and the um, cost of following Christ, of following the church, and as we're um, you know providing guidance to people in, let's say, some of the more discretionary areas of life. Maybe it's something as far as advising a couple whether they have legitimate means to space children or to postpone children, things that are not just black and white. They're not, right? um I think I think is something we need to look at more carefully and more seriously, and resist the urge to always err on the side of take the harder path, embrace the cross, you know, do the more difficult version. I don't think that necessarily needs to be or should be the default approach. Let's look at it a little more unbiased, a little more um, objective, and try to do what's legitimately best for the couple and the family, and not sort of a hedging, protecting ourselves or protecting someone we're guiding because we're in the back of our mind we're afraid of God being more severe and judgmental than we would like to hope. I mean, that's a real Catholic problem. Real Catholic struggle is to Catholics really struggle with the idea of God being merciful and loving. And no matter how much we say God is, perfect justice and perfect mercy, I think all of us, even the non-traditionalists, struggle with not assuming that in close calls God's going to go towards the more the justice approach, right? Because hell, we're told hell is real and hell sounds horrible and hell is, you know, it's the whole Pascal's wager. Well, if there's any uncertainty, err on the side of caution. And I get that, and I'm not saying any of that's wrong, but I think it can lead people to undertake crosses that may not actually be God's design, or impose crosses that may not actually be God's design, and more importantly, maybe can cause real and predictable and irreparable harm to others, most notably the children, um, who are constantly learning and absorbing and becoming, modeling the good, the bad, and the ugly that they see at home, and that it ought to be an imperative for us to maximize the goodness that they see, the hope that they see, the genuine love that they see, and minimize um, the opposite. Right? That I feel very strongly about that, and I would like to propose that we try to move more in that direction in our dialogue about these things as in our pastoral guidance, and just for people to understand as before they get married or in their newly married. Um, the things I talk about here uh, have been are the result of a very organic process over time. I've been married for 20, almost 23 years. Trying to think here, almost 23 years, 9 kids. Um, I'm evolving. I'm growing. Hopefully, for the better, not for the worse. And um, these are things that I think I wish I would have known much sooner. And I think a lot of people would benefit from learning much sooner. And that's priests as well as married people. But because they are uncomfortable and sometimes embarrassing and unflattering, it's I think more common that these conversations simply don't happen. But I hope to change that a little bit, and so that's why I'm here talking about these things. Um, okay, been going for just about an hour. If there's any final comments that are appropriate, Jonah 2.0, I'll put them on and I'll respond um, to them. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Yeah. Marriage and family is hard. And I know that I've probably been guilty of being a bigger complainer than I should be about my circumstances in life, because obviously I know my problems, my struggles, my circumstances are not near as bad as a lot of people, and I'm very um, humbled by that, and sensitive to what some people go through. But I also think that um, you know I've taken my fair share of bumps and bruises and blows along the way that have molded me as a person, and perhaps more importantly, molded my children. And we don't get a second chance to form them. We can always try to improve ourselves, recover from things. But, our children, once they get to a certain age, even if they're still in the house, at some point they become their own persons, and our ability to guide them and instill values in them diminishes over time. And that's why I feel so passionate about all this stuff, because I see and I've experienced the actual significant ripple effects that these things have on couples, on their marriages, on their children, and you know society as a whole. Because our kids go out and they live their lives and they struggle with things and they make decisions and they set values for themselves and they make moral decisions. Um, I think creating an environment of strength and love and tenderness in the marriage in almost all circumstances only creates a better environment for all that, not a worse environment. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. I appreciate everyone who tuned in to listen to this, or if you show up after the fact, uh, feel free to leave comments, positive or otherwise. If you have any particular topics you would like me to cover, or um, resources you think I should check out, I will be happy to do so, because I do very much appreciate the feedback and the ability to learn and hopefully become a little better version of myself in the future. So thanks everyone for listening. And until next time, everyone, have a good one.